I drove long-distance buses for almost 11 years. During that time, I picked up thousands of passengers, families, college students, truck drivers, tourists, drunks, you name it. People always ask if I've ever seen anything supernatural while working nights. Until 3 years ago, I would have laughed and said no. I drove long-distance buses for almost 11 years. During that time, I picked up thousands of passengers, families, college students, truck drivers, tourists, drunks, you name it. People always ask if I've ever seen anything supernatural while working nights. Until 3 years ago, I would have laughed and said no. But after one particular night, I quit taking overnight routes forever. I never told this story publicly because I knew nobody would believe me. Even now, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm only telling you exactly what happened. It was late October. Cold rain had been falling since sunset. Visibility was terrible, and the roads were almost empty. My route ran between two cities, passing through several tiny villages that barely appeared on maps anymore. It was my last trip of the night. By midnight, only 4 passengers remained on the bus. I thought it would be another quiet drive. I couldn't have been more wrong. The rain hadn't let up at all. Just a steady drumming on the windshield that made the wipers useless half the time. I remember checking my mirrors more than usual. Not because anything was wrong. Just habit. 10 hours in, your eyes start looking for things to focus on. Around 12:40, we passed through one of those villages I mentioned. A cluster of maybe 15 houses. One gas station that closed at 8. No streetlights past the church. The kind of place you blink, and you've already left. That's when the woman in seat 14 tapped the window and asked me to stop. I sat there with the door open for a second longer than I should have, watching her go, and something about it didn't sit right in my stomach. But it wasn't my business. I closed the door and pulled back onto the road. About 2 kilometers later, one of the other passengers, a college kid near the back, leaned into the aisle and asked me who I had just let off. I said the woman in 14. He said seat 14 had been empty the entire trip. I told her we didn't have a stop scheduled there. The nearest official one was another 20 minutes up the road. She said it didn't matter. She needed to get off right there, and there was something in her voice that made me pull over without arguing. I opened the door. She thanked me, stepped down into the rain, and walked toward the tree line at the edge of the village. Not toward any house, not toward the road, just straight into the dark. No umbrella, no bag, nothing. About 40 minutes later, I approached a stop that wasn't really a stop anymore. Years ago, buses used to pick people up there, but after the highway was rebuilt, the company removed it from every official route. There wasn't even a sign left. Just an old concrete shelter surrounded by weeds. Nobody ever waited there, especially not after midnight. As my headlights swept across the road, I noticed someone standing under the shelter. A man. He wasn't waving his arms or trying to get my attention. He was simply standing there, facing the road as if he had known the bus would come. At first, I assumed he needed help. Maybe his car had broken down, so I slowed down and opened the doors. The man stepped inside without saying a word. He looked to be in his 50s. Dark coat, gray cap, an old canvas duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. His clothes looked perfectly clean. That's what caught my attention. Outside, the rain was coming down hard. The pavement was soaked. Even my shoes were wet from checking the tires earlier that evening. But this man, his coat was completely dry. Not damp, not slightly wet. Completely dry. He walked to the fare box and handed me a $20 bill. His hand felt strangely cold when I gave him his change. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "The last stop," he replied. His voice was calm, almost emotionless. I printed his ticket. He thanked me politely and walked toward the very back of the bus, the last row. He sat by the window. Then he became perfectly still. No phone, no headphones, no book, nothing. Just sitting there, staring straight ahead. I pulled back onto the highway, telling myself that I was overthinking things. Still, for some reason, I checked the rearview mirror more often than usual. Every single time he was looking directly at me. About 20 minutes passed. The rain grew heavier, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep up. The only sounds inside the bus were the engine, the rhythmic squeak of the wipers, and the occasional rattle from loose panels above the seats. The passengers had been quiet the entire trip. Then one of them stood up. An elderly woman who had boarded 2 towns earlier slowly made her way to the front of the bus, holding onto the handrails for balance. I assumed she wanted to ask about her stop. Instead, she leaned toward me and spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you know that man sitting in the back?" I glanced into the mirror. "The one in the gray cap." She nodded. "No," I said. "Why?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't think he's taken his eyes off you since he got on." I laughed nervously. "He probably doesn't have anything else to look at." She didn't smile. "I'm serious." I looked into the mirror again. The man was still sitting exactly where he'd been. His face was difficult to make out in the darkness, but there was no mistaking where he was looking. Straight at me, not out the window, not at the aisle, not at the other passengers. At me. Trying not to let it bother me, I shrugged. "Maybe he's just thinking." The woman shook her head. "No." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I've been watching him for 20 minutes. He hasn't blinked." I looked into the mirror again. The man was still sitting exactly where he'd been. His face was difficult to make out in the darkness, but there was no mistaking where he was looking. Straight at me, not out the window, not at the aisle, not at the other passengers. At me. Trying not to let it bother me, I shrugged. "Maybe he's just thinking." The woman shook her head. "No." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I've been watching him for 20 minutes. He hasn't blinked." About 10 minutes later, we reached the next village. The elderly woman thanked me quietly and stepped off the bus. Before the doors closed, she turned back toward me. "Be careful," she said. Then she looked past me, toward the back of the bus. Her expression changed. For a split second, she looked genuinely frightened. Without another word, she hurried into the rain. The doors closed. Now there were only 3 people left. Me, a young man asleep near the middle of the bus, and the passenger in the last row. The road ahead stretched through miles of dense forest. No streetlights, no houses, just darkness on both sides. A few minutes later, I noticed something strange on the dashboard. The inside temperature had dropped from 71 degrees F to 58 degrees F. I hadn't touched the climate controls. At first, I assumed the heater had malfunctioned, but then I saw my breath inside the bus. That had never happened before. The road ahead stretched through miles of dense forest. No streetlights, no houses, just darkness on both sides. A few minutes later, I noticed something strange on the dashboard. The inside temperature had dropped from 71 degrees F to 58 degrees F. I hadn't touched the climate controls. At first, I assumed the heater had malfunctioned, but then I saw my breath inside the bus. That had never happened before. A sudden voice broke the silence. "Driver." It was the young man. He had finally woken up. "Yeah. Did someone get on earlier?" "Yes, at the old bus stop." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "How do you know about that stop?" He frowned. "My grandfather used to drive this route. He always told me never to stop there." I forced a laugh. People love making up ghost stories. The young man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the back of the bus. His face instantly lost all color. In a shaky voice, he whispered, "He's here again." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean he's here again?" I asked. The young man didn't answer. He kept staring toward the back of the bus as if he had seen someone he recognized. His breathing became faster. Then, without another word, he grabbed his backpack and walked to the front. "Can I sit up here?" I nodded. He took the seat directly behind me. For the next several minutes, neither of us said anything. I kept my eyes on the road, but every so often I'd glance into the rearview mirror. The man was still there, motionless, watching. Eventually, we reached the final stop before entering the city. The young man stood up. "This is me." Before stepping off, he leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "If he's still on the bus after I leave, don't talk to him." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the doors opened, and he disappeared into the rain. Now I was alone, or at least, I thought I was alone with one passenger. The city lights appeared in the distance. Only 15 minutes remained until the end of my shift. I looked into the mirror again. The last row was empty. I blinked. Looked again. Nothing. The man was gone. I immediately checked the passenger door indicator. Closed. It had never opened. Modern buses record every door cycle on the dashboard. 0. No stops, no emergency release, no warning lights, no alarms. I slowed the bus and pulled onto the shoulder. For the first time in my career, I walked through the entire bus while it was still dark outside. Every seat, every aisle, every corner, no one. The passenger had simply vanished. I stood there in complete silence until something caught my eye. On the very last seat, where the man had been sitting, was the old canvas duffel bag, the same one he'd carried aboard. I was absolutely certain it hadn't been there a minute earlier. It looked as though someone had placed it neatly in the center of the seat. I reached out to pick it up. It was surprisingly heavy. For a moment, I considered opening it. Then I heard my radio crackle. The dispatcher. Unit 14. Why have you stopped? Your GPS shows you're parked on Highway 16. I looked at the bag again. For reasons I still can't explain, I suddenly didn't want to touch the zipper. I picked up the duffel bag and carried it to the front of the bus, placing it beside my seat. The dispatcher was still waiting for an answer. Everything okay? She asked. I looked in the rearview mirror one more time. Every seat was empty. Yeah, I replied after a long pause. A passenger must be left a bag behind. She sighed. Just bring it to the depot. Lost and found will deal with it in the morning. Copy that. I hung up the radio and pulled back onto the highway. The rest of the drive felt unnaturally quiet. The heater suddenly started working again. The temperature inside the bus slowly returned to normal. It was as if nothing had happened. But every few seconds, my eyes drifted toward the duffel bag sitting beside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't belong there, almost like it had been waiting for me. When I finally reached the depot, the maintenance crew had already gone home. Only one security guard was on duty. I told him a passenger had forgotten his bag. He asked the usual questions. Did you get his name? No. Ticket number? I don't remember. What did he look like? I opened my mouth, then realized something strange. I couldn't clearly remember his face. I remembered the coat, the cap, the bag, even the sound of his voice. But his face, it was like trying to remember someone from a dream. Every detail slipped away the moment I tried to focus on it. The guard noticed my hesitation. You okay? Yeah, I wasn't okay. He placed the bag in the lost and found office and locked the door. Police will check it in the morning, he said. I nodded and went home. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the rearview mirror, and every time the man was sitting in the last row, looking directly at me, without blinking. The next morning, my phone rang just after 9. It was my supervisor. His voice sounded unusually serious. Can you come to the depot? Why? The police want to speak with you. My first thought was that the bag contained something illegal. Drugs, money, maybe even a weapon. Instead, what I found was much stranger. Two police officers were waiting in the manager's office. The duffel bag sat on the table, unzipped. One of the officers looked at me. Is this the bag you found? Yes. And you're certain it belonged to the man who boarded your bus last night? I'm positive. He exchanged a quick glance with his partner before turning the bag around. Inside were only a few ordinary items. A folded gray jacket, an old leather wallet, a small metal key, several black and white photographs, and a driver's license. The officer picked it up carefully and handed it to me. This is him. I froze. It was the same man. The gray cap, the tired eyes, the same expression I'd seen in my mirror all night. I'm sure, I said. I drove him here. Neither officer said anything for several seconds. Finally, the older one took the license back. You couldn't have. What do you mean? He opened a folder lying on the desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, 7 dead in late-night bus collision on Highway 16. The date caught my attention immediately. It was exactly 20 years ago. The officer pointed to one of the photographs printed beneath the article. It showed a crushed bus lying in a ditch. Then he pointed to one of the victims listed underneath, the same name that appeared on the driver's license. That man died at the scene. I stared at the page, unable to speak. The officer continued. The accident happened less than a mile from the old bus stop, where you picked him up. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I wanted to argue, to say they had the wrong person, but then the officer asked one final question. Can you tell us exactly where he got on the bus? I swallowed hard. The abandoned stop just before the forest. Both officers looked at each other. Neither of them seemed surprised, as if they had heard that answer before.